The conflict in Ukraine has entered a stage where the conversations are no longer about quick victories or immediate peace deals, but about the possibility that the war may drag on for many years. The recent statement by Friedrich Merz, a prominent German political figure, highlights exactly this fear. His warning is not just speculation, but a reflection of how world powers and analysts are now viewing the crisis. To understand why this matters, and why his words carry weight, we need to step back and break down what's happening in the region, how international politics are shaping the war, and what this could mean for ordinary people across the world, especially for Muslim nations and communities who are indirectly affected. The war between Russia and Ukraine did not start in 2022. Its roots stretch back at least a decade, when Ukraine faced political turmoil and Russia annexed Crimea in 2014. Since then, there has been a steady buildup of hostilities, mistrust, and military posturing. What the world witnessed in 2022 was the eruption of a full-scale invasion by Russia, something that shocked global powers and created the biggest war in Europe since World War II. The Western response was swift: sanctions on Russia, military support for Ukraine, and a broad push to weaken Russia's capacity to continue fighting. But here's where the complexity lies. Russia, despite facing heavy sanctions, is a country with immense natural resources, a large population, and strategic partnerships, particularly with China, Iran, and some states across Asia and Africa. Sanctions have hurt, yes, but they have not broken the backbone of the Russian economy. The ruble adjusted, trade routes were restructured, and alternative markets opened. On the other side, Ukraine has been receiving billions in military aid, advanced weaponry, and training from NATO countries. The result is a grinding war of attrition, with both sides deeply entrenched and neither showing signs of giving up. Friedrich Merz's warning that the war could last for years reflects this reality. Wars of attrition are not decided in weeks or months. They depend on resources, manpower, political will, and the ability to withstand long-term suffering. Both Russia and Ukraine seem prepared for exactly that, and the world powers backing them are equally invested. For Russia, this is about maintaining its influence and ensuring Ukraine does not fully integrate with NATO or the European Union. For the West, particularly the US and European states, this war is about weakening Russia strategically and demonstrating the strength of NATO alliances. Now, what does this mean for ordinary people? Let's first look at Europe. The longer the war lasts, the more Europe struggles with energy costs, inflation, and the political strain of supporting millions of Ukrainian refugees. Already, countries like Germany, France, and Poland are feeling economic stress. Inflation in food and fuel prices has hit not just Europe but the entire world, including countries far removed from the battlefield. Energy pipelines, grain exports, and supply chain disruptions are directly tied to this war. When it comes to the Muslim world, the impacts are equally serious. Many Muslim-majority countries in the Middle East, North Africa, and South Asia depend heavily on Ukrainian and Russian wheat, grain, and fertilizer. For example, Egypt and Turkey rely on imports from both countries. When ports like Odessa are blocked, or when missile strikes hit storage facilities, it directly raises bread prices in Cairo, Istanbul, Karachi, and beyond. For families in poorer regions, this is not a small inconvenience. It's a matter of survival. Rising food insecurity has already sparked protests in some countries, reminding us that the war's impact reaches far beyond Europe. Muslim nations also find themselves in a delicate diplomatic position. On one hand, many have close trade ties with Russia, particularly in oil, gas, and defense sectors. On the other hand, they also have long-standing relations with Western powers. The war forces them into a balancing act. For example, Gulf states like Saudi Arabia and the UAE continue to engage with Russia on energy deals, while also maintaining security ties with the US. Turkey plays a unique role, being both a NATO member and a country that maintains communication channels with Moscow. This dual role allowed Turkey to broker grain export deals. showing that Muslim nations can play a constructive part in easing global crises caused by the war. For the wider Muslim community, especially in places like Pakistan, Indonesia, or African states, the concern is less about geopolitics and more about daily survival. Rising inflation, currency devaluation, and economic instability are worsened when global powers remain locked in conflicts. What Merz is warning about is not just a European problem. A prolonged war means prolonged instability worldwide, and the Muslim world often bears a heavier share of that burden due to existing economic struggles. There's another aspect worth noting. Wars of attrition don't just damage economies, they reshape global alliances. If this war does last for many years, we could witness a major shift in how countries align themselves. China is already positioning itself as a broker of peace. Though its proposals lean in favor of Russia's interests, Iran has supplied drones to Russia, while Western states continue pouring weapons into Ukraine. This polarization creates a scenario where middle-power countries, including Muslim-majority nations, must carefully navigate to protect their interests. Some might see opportunities, such as energy exporters who benefit from higher prices, while others will suffer devastating consequences. Looking at the military side, Ukraine has shown remarkable resilience, pushing back Russian advances with the help of Western weapons like HIMARS, Patriot systems, and tanks. However, Russia still controls significant portions of eastern and southern Ukraine, including key ports and industrial areas. The front lines are heavily fortified, and both sides are losing thousands of soldiers each month. This stalemate reinforces Merz's claim. Neither side has the capability for a decisive, quick victory. Unless one side collapses politically or economically, the conflict will stretch on. For Muslims watching this war from afar, the lesson is clear. Large powers often wage wars with little regard for the suffering of ordinary civilians. The images of destroyed Ukrainian cities mirror the devastation seen in Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and Afghanistan over the past 2 decades. Civilian lives become collateral damage in struggles for power. The difference is that Ukraine receives massive global attention and support, while Muslim nations in similar crises often receive far less aid and media coverage. This double standard should remind the global Muslim community of the importance of unity, self-reliance, and strong diplomatic voices that can stand for justice in international forums. Another technical detail worth considering is the impact on defense spending worldwide. Since the war began, NATO countries have dramatically increased their military budgets. Germany, for instance, announced a special fund of 100 billion euros to upgrade its military. Poland, the Baltic states, and others are doing the same. Russia, too, is spending heavily on war production, shifting its economy to sustain long-term conflict. When global powers spend more on weapons, less is invested in poverty reduction, climate solutions, or humanitarian causes. This trend does not benefit developing nations, including Muslim countries, who depend on international aid and cooperation for growth. At the same time, the war has triggered debates about energy independence. Europe has moved away from Russian gas, turning instead to supplies from the US, Qatar, and other producers. This has increased the importance of Muslim-majority nations like Qatar and Algeria as energy exporters. So while some countries face hardship, others are gaining leverage in global politics because of shifting energy needs. For example, Gulf states have used this moment to strengthen their ties with Europe and Asia, making themselves central players in future global energy security. The humanitarian dimension cannot be ignored. Millions of Ukrainians have been displaced, creating one of the largest refugee crises in modern history. Neighboring countries like Poland and Hungary have absorbed huge numbers, but the pressure is immense. At the same time, Muslim refugees from Syria, Afghanistan, and other wars often face harsher treatment in Europe compared to Ukrainians. This exposes a painful truth about global politics. compassion is often selective. While Ukrainians deserve safety and support, so too do Muslims fleeing wars. Yet the unequal response reveals deeper issues of bias and discrimination in international systems. The war has also revived discussions about nuclear risks. Russia has made indirect threats, reminding the world that it possesses one of the largest nuclear arsenals. NATO leaders tread carefully to avoid escalation, but the danger remains. For Muslims living in regions already under conflict, the idea of another global war is terrifying. The mere possibility of nuclear confrontation sends shockwaves through markets and societies. If the war drags on, these risks increase, making the world less safe for everyone. Economically, prolonged wars also create opportunities for profiteering. Arms manufacturers in the West are seeing record profits. Energy companies have also gained. But for ordinary people, especially in vulnerable regions, war means higher costs of living, unemployment, and instability. The Muslim world, with its youthful populations and often fragile economies, is particularly exposed to these ripple effects. Merz's warning should therefore be taken seriously. If global leaders prepare for a war lasting years, they will shape their policies accordingly. That means more military aid for Ukraine, more sanctions on Russia, and more geopolitical maneuvering. But it also means less global focus on peace building, poverty reduction, or addressing humanitarian crises elsewhere. Conflicts in Palestine, Yemen, or Sudan risk being sidelined as attention remains fixed on Ukraine. This neglect harms Muslim populations directly. At the same time, the Muslim world is not powerless. Nations like Turkey, Qatar, and even Indonesia have played diplomatic roles, offering to mediate or support dialogue. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation has the potential to raise collective voices, though it often struggles with unity. If the war lasts years, there will be multiple opportunities for Muslim-majority nations to step in as mediators, humanitarian leaders, or suppliers of vital resources like food and energy. Taking such roles not only benefits global stability, but also strengthens the standing of Muslims in international affairs.